Chapter 29 covers vertebrates. This is the group that includes more familiar animals to most students, like cats, apes, and birds. We're going to focus on the chordates, which includes everything from the members of Cephalochordata to Mammalia. We'll see multiple body form changes over evolutionary history to move from the simple lancelets and tunicates with their sac-like bodies to animals like snakes and bears. The term chordate is a reference to 4 common features in the body plan. Chordates have a notochord, which is a rod made out of cartilage used for structural support. They have a dorsal hollow nerve cord that contains neurological cells. They have pharyngeal slits that develop into some form of breathing structure, and finally a postanal tail. All 4 of these features may or may not be kept in the adult form of the chordate, but it is seen at one point in time in their life cycle. That organism we just saw is a member of the cephalochordates. It's an adult lancelet, and it has all 4 of the classical chordate features. Lancelets anchor themselves into the filtrate on the bottom of bodies of water, and they filter feed through tentacles that are free-floating. You can see the mouth on the head end sticking just above the substrate. You can easily see those same body features in the larval stage of our next organism, the tunicates. Tunicates are their own clade of organism known as the Chordata. Their name comes from the outer covering of their body, which looks just like a tunic. In the adult form, the notochord, the nerve cord, and the tail have all been lost as the body develops. Like the lancelets, they're largely sessile filter feeders. They live kind of similarly to the sponges that we studied in the invertebrate chapter. So chordates have all 4 of those aforementioned body features. The next major evolutionary jump was for developing the head. Organisms that are included under the Craniata title have a head protected by bony plates, a mandible, and a smattering of other facial bones. Hagfish are considered members of Craniata. They're eel-shaped, slime-producing marine fish that can be found in all ocean water, except for the water nearest the poles. They are the only known living animals that have a skull but no vertebral column. Hagfish have an incredible ability to produce massive amounts of slime through glands that run down the sides of their bodies. They can protect themselves even from organisms like sharks by creating a huge amount of this material, which essentially chokes anyone who tries to eat them. There are a lot of really cool videos of this online if you'd like to take a second to Google it. The next major change in the development of the body plan was the vertebral column. The fish hanging off the side of this fish are lampreys. They're parasitic, jawless fish that are toothed and have a funnel-like sucking mouth, therefore a head and a vertebral column. They feed off the tissue and blood of more desirable species of fish. When I say more desirable, I mean those that humans are generally interested in. While they have been a focus of an episode of River Monsters, they're not considered monsters by all, and it's important to me to point that out to you. They in fact are sacred to the Yakima tribe in the northwestern United States, largely centrally located now anyway in Oregon. These fish have to travel upstream to complete their life cycles, and they have a hard time moving past human-made water features like dams, and it stops them from being able to reproduce. Members of the Yakima tribe work to save this unique organism that is evolutionarily older than a dinosaur, so they continue to pass down this sacred part of their culture to their children for many generations to come. The lampreys were jawless. The first jawed fish were thought to be the placoderms that are now extinct. They lived during the Devonian period and had bony plates covering the outside of their head and neck. They also developed paired fins that allowed them to be excellent swimmers and therefore agile predators. The most closely related members to the placoderms are the sharks, known as the chondrichthyes. They have jaws, paired fins, and skeletons made out of cartilage that are strengthened by collections of calcium and calcium carbonate. They have teeth that appear to have evolved from specialized scales from the outsides of their bodies. Maybe those cells once grew the bony plates of armor seen on placoderms. Sharks have mastered electroreception, allowing them to detect the electrical field of all living organisms, crafting a near-perfect predator. They also have a lateral line organ, which helps them to keep in tune to the movement and vibrations in the water surrounding them, allowing them to hunt regardless of what they can see. Sharks reproduce sexually and have an internal fertilization of female eggs. How those eggs develop after that can vary widely. Some eggs are laid in shark cases that feel a bit like leather and they develop there. Other sharks have eggs that are maintained internally. The eggs then hatch internally, and the babies are born as fully functional adults. A few species of sharks develop as babies internally and then are simply born alive without the egg-like structure ever being involved. There's incredible diversity to this process. Rays and skates comprise more than 500 species and are closely related to sharks. They can be distinguished from sharks by their flattened bodies and pectoral fins that have enlarged and attached to the head of the animals. They also contain their gill slits on their ventral surfaces. A majority of them live on the ocean floor with worldwide distribution. Members of Osteichthyes are bony fish with internal skeletons. Most extant fishes belong to this group. Bony fish have overlapping scales, gills for breathing, and swim bladders for buoyancy. Bony fish can either be ray-finned and have supporting webbing tissue between thin bones, or they can be lobed-finned fishes with thicker bones and muscular structures within the fin itself. This would allow these fish to walk along the bottom of the ocean floor. We'll switch now from the fishes to the amphibians. Amphibians have 4 well-developed limbs or the ability to create them. Most have moist, permeable skin that has associated mucus glands for moisture and gas exchange. They also have specialized ear structures, allowing them to hear both extremely high and extremely low frequencies. Finally, all extant adult amphibians are carnivores. Here you see an intermediary amphibian, which is essentially a fish that could do push-ups and crawl from one low pool of water onto the next. On ground, it would have had no predators, allowing for vast evolutionary change in relatively short periods of time. The Carboniferous period was known as the age of the amphibians, when creatures that look similar to this one would have ruled the world. Amphibians exist in 3 clades, one with tails, one without, and a third clade without legs. The clade with tails is what you know of as the salamanders, and they live both in water and on land. They have 4 limbs, a tail, and they move side to side as they walk or swim because of their body structure. They breathe through their skin, or in some cases via external gills. A few even have really primitive versions of lungs. Their eggs are fertilized internally, and when laid, they're protected by the mother until they hatch. They lose their gills, again, for the most part, while they're still in eggs, and the hatchlings appear as little tiny adults. Frogs are some of the most diverse vertebrate species. Their body plan allows them to move easily in the environment, jumping and landing without damage or impact to the body. They lay external eggs and wait for external fertilization in consistently moist environments. Frogs undergo a very famous life cycle that includes larvae known as tadpoles and adults in fully classical frog-shaped bodies. They lose their tails as they age, growing legs and lungs and increasing the overall size of their jaws. Caecilians are amphibians that have lost their legs as vestigial organs. They are adapted especially for soil burrowing or an aquatic life and are pretty much blind. Amniotes are our next evolutionary distinction. Amniotes include reptiles, birds, and mammals. Their eggs are built for incubation on land, and they have a protective amniotic membrane that is retained even when the eggshell isn't part of the equation anymore. Also included in the egg is the protein and water-supplying albumin, and the fatty egg yolk for energy. Extra membranes assist in absorbing physical shocks, and others are there for gas or waste exchange. Let's look first at the amniotes known as reptiles. Reptiles are tetrapods who lay their eggs with shells on land. They reproduce sexually via internal fertilization. They have scaly skin and they're ectotherms, so they get their heat from the environment. This allows them to decrease their calorie requirement to a measly 10% of what a similarly sized mammal might require. It's quite helpful when you live in places like the desert where there might not be that much food just lying around. The evolution of reptiles started about 300 million years ago, and they quickly diverged into 3 different animal lines that are most easily told apart by examining their skull structures. No one group stood out until the time of the dinosaurs and the pterosaurs. Dinosaurs were diverse terrestrial reptiles that we're still actively learning about. Some were bipeds, others walked on all fours. They laid eggs, and we think that they were probably ectotherms, but they very well could have been endotherms, and we just don't have that data yet. Birds are the only living descendants of one of the major clades of dinosaurs. Modern reptiles are living in 4 clades. The members of Crocodilia include alligators, crocodiles, and caimans, and they can live in fresh to saltwater while retaining the ability to spend a good amount of time on land. Sphenodonta members are tiny like lizards, but they're clearly a different clade once you start to study their skin and jaw structures. Squamata includes reptiles and snakes, the latter missing limbs, ears, and eyelids. These reptiles can vary greatly in size, but they do all lay eggs and are largely carnivores. Here's an example of a simple gardener snake that is very widely distributed throughout North America. The final group of modern-day reptiles includes the turtles. They have a bony or cartilaginous shell which exists in plates that allow us to actually delineate them into different species. Tortoises tend to live on land or in fresh water, while turtles are what we think of as the organisms that live in the sea. They all return to land eventually to lay eggs before heading back out into their preferred environments. Birds can largely be thought of essentially as reptiles with feathers. They have extremely high metabolic rates and feathers that insulate them from heat loss and allow them to fly. Different types of feathers on birds can have different purposes. Primary feathers provide thrust that is needed to take off, while secondary feathers provide the lift to keep birds in flight. The study of feathers is actually quite intensive, and there are more potential classifications and some specific information that you can find for your favorite species of bird. Another requirement for flight is low body weight, which is achieved through having a few different things. One is pneumatic bones, as seen here. The weight and structure of the bones differs with the weight and structure of the bird, but largely they're hollows with these bridges for support and impact resistance. Another way birds maintain their light body weight is by lacking a urinary bladder. They absorb all the water from the urinary system back into their bodies and remove dangerous things like uric acids and salts in their fecal matter. Females maintain a lighter body weight by only having one ovary. Those pneumatic bones we just looked at have air sacs that extend into them. Those sacs also join with the lungs and function in respiration. Unlike mammalian lungs, where air flows both in and out, airflow through bird lungs actually only travels in one direction. The air sacs allow for unidirectional airflow, which creates a cross-current exchange system with the blood. In the cross-current or counter-current system, the air flows in one direction and the blood flows in the opposite direction. And this creates a very efficient means of gas exchange and more lightweight bodies. The evolution of birds isn't clear. Their fragile bones don't form fossils well. Archaeopteryx are a well-known intermediary form that is related to modern-day birds. They were dinosaurs that looked a bit like a bird with teeth, feathers, thicker bones, and claws at the ends of their arms. The characteristics of mammals are a bit more familiar. They have hair, they're endothermic, their skin has multiple gland types. The skeletal structure allows for special bones for auditory processing and specialized chewing, and they have a lot of internal structures and organs that are unique to the group, like a 4-chambered heart, specialized kidneys, and specialized brain structures. This organism, a cyanodont, is thought to have been the ancestor to all modern mammals. He evolved approximately 260 million years ago and was the size of a small, modern rodent. They wouldn't have been able to have evolved until after the dinosaurs were largely extinct. They simply couldn't have competed well for resources, with organisms like the dinosaurs fighting with them. Modern-day mammals are either placental in nature or they're monotremes, which means that they give birth into a pouch. The platypus on the left is the type of monotreme that most Americans are familiar with. Marsupials live in Australia. They developed on the island after it split from other land masses. They give premature birth into a pouch where the babies continue to feed and to grow until they're ready to be released into their environment. The final section of the chapter focuses on the order primates, which includes lemurs, tarsers, monkeys, apes, and humans. All primates possess adaptation for the ability to climb trees, like rotating shoulders, separate hands and feet, and stereoscopic or overlapping vision that allows us to gauge depth and distance. Primates are split into prosimians, so these are the bush babies, lemurs, lorises, pottos, and tarsers, and then everything else is considered an anthropoid. The primate-like mammals that evolved first are referred to as proto-primates. We don't have a lot of fossil evidence for them, so we make few claims about their lives. Ancestors that we have been able to study have body forms that range from really small individuals with long tails and small brains to individuals like chimps with no brains and relatively large brains. The family Hominidae includes hominids, great apes, and humans, and that's what we'll head next. Hominy includes 3 major branch points. The Australopithecus branch includes a group that is believed to have evolved in Africa about 4 million years ago and went extinct about 2 million years later. Members of this family vaguely resembled modern humans. They were bipedal in nature, and the male of the species was about 50% larger than the average female, which would be considered odd, obviously, for modern people. They had larger jaw structures and sloped foreheads. A second branch, Paranthropus, didn't live very long, but we can surmise that they were largely vegetarian and don't seem to have any modern ancestors. Here you can see an example of an Australopithecus skull, specifically Australopithecus afarensis, which was a very early hominid. On the right-hand side, you can see a modern human. There are really similar bone structures, but overall changes in the shape of the face and the skull. These remnants are of an adult female that was a member of Australopithecus afarensis, nicknamed Lucy. We've derived a lot of the information we have about Australopithecus from this skeleton and ones that are very similar to it. Members of the genus Homo are very similar to us. They had a less prominent jaw than what we just looked at and a higher forehead, allowing for a larger brain. They evolved closer to 2 million years ago. The book discusses evolutionary changes in multiple hominid species over time and presents numerous ideas about where these changes would have come from and, in some instances, what might have happened to the different groups. A number of species, sometimes called the archaic Homo sapiens, apparently evolved from Homo erectus about 500,000 years ago. These species include Homo heidelbergensis, Homo rhodensius, and Homo neanderthalensis. These archaic Homo sapien species had a brain size pretty similar to that of modern humans, ranging anywhere between 1,200 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. They differed from modern humans, though, because they had a really thick skull, prominent brow ridges, and a receding chin rather than the modern chin, which juts from the face. Some of these species seem to have survived until about 30,000 to 10,000 years ago. So they would have been around when modern humans were also around. There's considerable debate about the origins of atomically modern humans, which we now consider Homo sapiens sapiens. Members of Homo erectus, a group very similar to us, migrated out of Africa and into Asia and Europe in the first major wave of migration seen out of Africa about 1.5 million years ago. It's thought that modern humans themselves arose in Africa from members of this original Homo erectus group. They didn't migrate out of Africa until about 100,000 years ago, though, in a second major migration wave. Modern humans replaced Homo erectus by outcompeting them in all those areas in Asia and Europe where they found the members from the first migration living and surviving. This evolutionary timeline is supported by molecular evidence. One approach to studying the origins of modern humans is to examine mitochondrial DNA in populations that developed from around the world. Mitochondrial DNA doesn't change much because our mitochondria have been derived straight from the eggs of our mothers. Sperm have mitochondria in their tail, but the tail is lost in the fertilization process. So your mitochondria look exactly like your mother's mitochondria and her mother's mitochondria on down the line. You can trace this mitochondrial DNA back through history via a timeline of genetic divergence. The resulting evidence supports that all modern humans have the mitochondrial DNA that was inherited from a common ancestor that lived in Africa about 160 to 175 years ago. You can study human evolution by examining the Y chromosome, which, much like the mitochondria, is passed from mother to her children. It, in turn, is passed from father to son. This evidence suggests that all men today inherited a Y chromosome from a male that lived in Africa about 140,000 years ago. So similar lines of data studied on two different pieces of genetic evidence lead us back to the same place at approximately the same time. It's evidence, once studied in depth, that's hard to argue with. With that, we end our chapter. So you should go back and read it, take notes in your own words, and then complete all the learner practice activities. Finally, complete your learner homework assignment that covers Chapter 29.